In this episode of Ask a Griffin, we talk about the 4 keys to closing your property sale. So in this episode, it's important to discuss why closing with care is very important to protect your sale. It's one thing to get a property under contract. It's another to bring it to the finish line where the deal gets consummated. So point number 1, closing requires attention to detail. Yes, I know it's stating the obvious, but it is a critical attention to dates, deadlines, all of the parties involved. There is an enormous amount of information that's about to go back and forth during the process of the closing. Too many people and agents put the house under agreement or the property under agreement and assume somebody else will take care of all that detail, and that's just not true. You must be, as the property seller, fully responsible, even when you're being represented by title companies, attorneys, agents, etc. Take full responsibility for the details of the contract and what they say. Point number 2 is very important, but also simple. You must stay focused on what you must do, not everybody else. I know this is subtle, but very important. Oftentimes, when you're in the middle of closing, you're always worried about, well, what's the buyer's financing look like? And what is the buyer going to do about the home inspection? And you begin to sweat the details that belong to somebody else. So it's most important to figure out what is the seller, you, responsible for, so that you can stay very focused on what you must do. That way your part of the transaction is living in this integrity, so that you are really trying to focus on your responsibilities. I know it sounds simple again, but these keys are very important, and in my experience, I have seen an enormous amount of problems be created simply because the seller took their eye off of the form of the contract and what they were supposed to do and when they were supposed to do it. So that leads to point number 3. Consider the dates seriously. That's right. When you look at a contract, this is a process. It is definitely not an event. You do not sell your house just one day. That doesn't happen like that. You come to an agreement under contract, and for example, in Massachusetts, there's multiple contracts. There are multiple contracts that you have to follow through with new details. So it's key to be organized based on when certain contingencies have to be met. Now, of course, I don't mean to not pay attention to what the buy side must do, because that's protecting your sale as well. It's okay to inquire, but really it's important for you to pay attention to the dates that matter for you. And there's no bigger one than the closing date. When you go under agreement with a property, you are going to be shocked at how little time you actually have to make your move. So if it's a home that you live in or an investment property and there are items that have to be removed, most properties are delivered under the condition of being broom clean. And most sellers wait till the very end to organize this. Don't do that. The minute this all begins, this closing process begins, you want to take the moving date, the closing date, very seriously. Usually those are the same days, but what I recommend is certainly you get moving from the very beginning, all the way back to the beginning of our course, where you pay attention to getting ready to recondition and stage your property. That has a lot to do with already moving, so that when the real date comes and you must meet it, you're already mostly moved out. So dates, consider them very seriously. Are you still in contract if you're moving from one to the next? Are you well out in front of meeting that broom clean walkthrough? The walkthrough is usually the most important part for you. Are you ready? Because you don't want to get to the closing table and still have a problem on that date, especially if you're doing a simultaneous closing with another property. Then everything gets discombobulated. Problem. You see, it was in my head, right? Next, number 4, be flexible. right? So having said all of this and put all that pressure on you to meet these dates, it's also to the contrary. You must be flexible because something will go wrong. And it might be something that you couldn't control, the buyer couldn't control. It just happens. That's the part of the real estate business that is really complicated. There's so many parties that are party to the closing process. Again, let me repeat. There are title companies and attorneys depending on where you live. There are home inspectors that get involved. There are mortgage companies if there's a mortgage on the going to be put on the property by the buyer. There are appraisers. I go on and on and on. That's a lot to orchestrate here. So, albeit you're looking at what you must do and with critical attention to the detail of the dates, still be flexible. Understand that your emotions are going to be running high and that you're going to want to meet these dates, as I'm trying to instruct you to do, right? And help you get there, but you must be flexible because something will go sideways. Dates will get extended. There are enormous amounts of requests for extensions during the closing process for myriad reasons, right? But you have to also anticipate those challenges. And that's why you're in here paying attention to this education. That while flexible, you already know you're going to be challenged. This is not typically going to be orchestrated perfectly. When it is, if it is, throw a party at the end, because that means you had a bunch of competent people, including you and the buyer, who paid attention to all of this. So again, let's reiterate. There are 4 keys to closing your property sale with care. And the reason you want to do that, you don't want to lose your deal. You just sold for top dollar. Hopefully, if you followed the rest of this course, now we want to close it. You want to get that horse in the barn. Number 1, closing requires attention to detail, and there are a lot of those details. Number 2, stay focused on what you must do. That's the one thing that you can definitely control, is that you are doing what you're supposed to do. Number 3, consider all the dates that are in that contract seriously, but none more importantly than being prepared to move out of that property on the closing day. Number 4, throughout the whole thing, because there is so much going on, be flexible. Have a mentality of flexibility because you know you're anticipating there will be a challenge. And again, if you're organized, there'll be few of them. So keep an eye on everything when it comes to closing the sale of your property. Hey, we appreciate you being here, watching all this education. And if you know somebody that needs to see this video or hear this podcast, do me a favor. Move that along to them, will you? We'd appreciate it. Thanks for being here. See you in the next episode of Ask a Griffin.